What is it? Sumer. Okay, what's the next ancient kingdom on your timeline? When was India? Who's got their timeline out there? We're right here on BC. No, AD. So the next one after Sumer is Egypt. Actually, yeah, India and then China. Let's start learning these. Okay, Egypt is, we've moved it back to 3100. India, 2700. No, China's 20. Egypt, India. Is China 2200? Chinese.
Well, it does evidence of silk making in China.
And what year is that? 2700? Okay, and then we have 2500. Okay, so here we have silk here, I guess. But here we have Egypt.
So 2700 is in India.
What is it on your timeline?
It says evidence of silk making in China.
But 2500 is India, right?
Yes.
And then China's 2200.
That's when it flourished.
Okay, now, every river valley civilization started by water. We know this. So what water was Egypt by?
Nile.
Nile. What water was Sumer by? It was between two waters.
Tigris and Euphrates.
Tigris and Euphrates. What river did India start on? Two rivers.
Oh no.
Indus and Ganges. Indus and Ganges. And what about China?
Oh, the
Huanghe.
yeah, that's right.
Huanghe. Yellow River and Yangtze. There's so many ways to spell that. Okay. So two rivers for this one, and this one, but Egypt is on the Nile. So we're going to be looking at this over and over again. These old civilizations started by water. Okay, tell me why. Why did they need water? Come on, let's have some deductive reasoning.
Making food for the animals and stuff so they could live. Like water's the most important thing.
Okay, water to drink.
Yeah.
What else? Pardon? For farming, for growing their crops. Speak up a little so I can hear you. What else? Yes.
So that they could keep like livestock healthy, like give their livestock also water.
Yes, their livestock needed water. What's something else they might have used the river for? Bathing and washing their clothes. What else? Transportation. What else? There's something else valuable in the river.
Building. Or like electricity.
A food source?
Yeah, food.
Fish. Food is in the river. So there's a lot of ways that this water was important to new civilizations. Remember when we did the exercise where you dropped in the wilderness? What was the first thing everybody wanted?
Water.
Water. Okay, so it's the same here. You can see why that makes sense because you worked that out for yourself already. I'm going to tell you a little bit about ancient Sumer, and because this is where Abraham came from. And I want to tell you the story of Abraham. It's a little different that if you've gone to church all your life and you've heard in Sunday school or Sabbath school that Abraham was this crotchety old man with a long beard. Some of the pictures you see of him, he practically looks feeble. We're going to learn something about Abraham that might shake up your image. Okay, first of all, ancient Sumer. Now, this is exciting because this is the oldest civilization we know about, and yet we found so much. We go to the city of Uruk, which was the first city, U-R-A-K, that they think was big enough to be called a city in Mesopotamia, and today it is Iraq, I-R-A-Q. It was U-R-A-K, and now it's I-R-A-Q. It was a trade center, and the Sumerians were very business-minded people. They were all about business and making money. And they started out remembering, okay, I gave you this, you owe me that, but pretty soon managing a business without being able to record things became absolutely impossible because the human memory is error-prone. when it wasn't written down, they could argue, you owe me 7 cows. No, I don't, I owe you 2, and it could be a big mess. So that's what the earliest writing actually came out of, was the need to record business transactions. And cuneiform was born. Now, cuneiform is an interesting language. I think I have a picture on the front of the handout I gave you. There's a stylus that you can see gets punched into a piece of clay. And if you want to see a written document in cuneiform, you can turn the page. Okay, so this is a written document in cuneiform. You have to touch it to make it refocus on anything. Okay, this is a written document in cuneiform, and you can see that they used straight lines, and they used like a wedge shape to do all these letters. And because it was written on clay, quite a bit of it has survived, and we've learned a lot about it. So that's your cuneiform, and what was it born from? The need to what?
Business transactions.
Business transactions, okay. Like all early cities, it was very based on the agricultural evolution, where they finally learned to plant seeds and domesticate animals and hoe and plow and bring water to their crops. All that made cities possible, and Sumer was the first. Sumer's technological explosion wasn't matched until the 19th or 20th century. Imagine going from just an animal who wanders around looking for food to what Sumer discovered. Wheeled transport, the wheel, sailing ships, metallurgy, wheel-turned oven-baked pottery, methods of building large architectural structures and gigantic storage. So their architecture was really advanced. They could build something quite big. And they knew how to work with metal. They learned, in their architecture, they also learned about stone sculptures and engraving and how to inlay things to make it look pretty, like inlaid stone in the floor. They learned to make brick molds and to make bricks. And they also had the arch and the dome. So they were very, very sophisticated, just coming out of the Neolithic period into this advanced culture. Now, the women wore loose drapey cloth. If they were wealthy, they had bright, beautiful colors. Their cloth was all natural, like linen made from flax or cotton or wool. The men, very often, it's warm in that part of the world, they would just wear something tied around their waist. They often went shirtless unless the weather was cooler. And like all cultures, they developed a religion. That's one of the things that we counted as necessary to a civilization, right? So let's talk about religion in this time period. You are living in this time period. You've never heard of God or Buddha or Jesus or any of this stuff. You haven't heard of Siddhartha Gautama, you haven't heard of Zoroaster. None of those exist, none of those organized religions. So you're looking up and contemplating the heavens. Now when we contemplate the heavens, we say, oh, isn't it beautiful? And we get out our app and see what constellation we're looking at, right? And we say, oh, that's so neat. If you were a little helpless person on the earth without the protections you have today, and you looked up in the heavens and lightning flashed across the sky, it would be frightening because you do not understand it. So contemplating the heaven had a whole different meaning for the ancient mind. When they looked up, they were asking, what is it and why is it? We kind of feel like we know those answers already. So they would look up into the heavens and they would imagine higher powers that were doing things up there. What else would you say? There was mystery up there and there were unknown gods. Pretty soon everything in nature became a god. When lightning flashed, what mood were the gods in? Yeah, if it was stormy, they were feeling stormy. Their gods were jealous and contentious. They were like humans, only with more power. And they had many interesting names for their gods. And they observed the cycles. Everything had a cycle. The moon had a cycle. It would get smaller and smaller and disappear. Then it would come back and get bigger and bigger and be full. It had a cycle. The seasons had a cycle. Women had a cycle. Everything was cyclical that they saw, and so they believed that time was a wheel. It was a wheel that went around, and so your time would be like the full moon, and then you would fade and die, and you would be dark, and then you'd be born again, and you'd be like the full moon, and then you'd die. And so they believed that you could live the same life over and over, and fate controlled what happened to you, not you. The wheel of fate, fate comes from the ancient word spin. In many cultures, it comes from the word spin. And this, like the spider, it's fate. The spider designs the web, fate designs your life. The moon is all powerful in the Sumerian religion because it is so evident of the cycles. So clearly you see the cycles. Now the sun has a cycle. It comes in the morning, it goes across the sky, and it disappears. But the moon is their main symbol. They had gods for everything: personal gods, family gods, tribe gods, city gods. And each person would wear an amulet of their favorite god or ancestor that they felt would bless their life, and it would be around their neck. The realm of the dead in Sumerian theology was a horrible, hideous place. It was not fun. And if you believed that, if you believed you died and you went to hell and that was it, and you lived in that hell the rest of your life, then your philosophy in life might be very similar to the Sumerians. Sort of like eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you're going to be in hell, right? And so they did that. They wanted to make money, they wanted to be successful, they were extremely business-minded. So we look at this culture, and here all of a sudden we have Abraham. He was called Abram, enter Abram, and he lived in Ur, which was the capital of Sumer. And he, along with all his fellows, have observed the cycles of the sky, the stars, the seasons, the moon. And he had been a part of that culture. His father, Terah, lived in Ur, and Abram was born there, and he grew up there. And through the eyes of the ancients, all agreed that man was just a reflection of cycles, life and birth, life and birth. And so they had a desire to connect with something beyond themselves. Abram comes up on the scene. And the Bible tells us the beginnings of Terah. His whole family tree is in the Bible. And it's an unusual genealogy because they were a family of Semites. And in that genealogy, they named several women, which was unusual. So they lived during Sumer's golden age, and on your timeline that you're learning, you'll see the golden age of Sumer, and that's when Abram lived there. And he respected his father, he obeyed his father, and his father decided, and we don't know why, but he decided to move the family to Haran. Now this is during the time of Hammurabi. Hammurabi lived during this time, so we're at about 2000 BC. And Terah decides to move his family. And nobody really knows why, but we know from the Bible account, even though they don't word it this way, but Terah struck it rich in Haran. He became very wealthy. And he died in Haran, which is higher up you have the Persian Gulf and the Tigris and Euphrates going off like a V, and Sumer is between there, and this is higher up further from the Persian Gulf was Haran. And so he dies there at age 205. Terah lived to be 205. And then God spoke to Abram. God spoke to Abram, and he said, "Go you forth from your land, from your kindred, from your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make a great nation of you." So Abram went. They took their Sumerian outlook, which was the only thing they knew, with them. Something new is happening here in history. New must be born out of the old, and we can trace Sumerian religious notions in the earliest writings of Abram's descendants. Let me tell you some Sumerian beliefs which agree with Old Testament theology. Ezekiel gets angry at Jewish women in the temple because they're weeping for Dumuzi. Dumuzi was the victim of a Sumerian god that he fell in love with, and then she did him in. And he's called Tammuz in the Bible, that's his other name. So this shepherd king who fell in love with Inanna, or also the goddess Ishtar, died, and was resurrected, but he was supposed to suffer forever or something like that. But the women had a custom of meditating about this and crying. And so here in the Jewish temple, the women are crying for Dumuzi. So there's the Sumerian religion still penetrating into the Jewish psyche. The Sumerian creation arose out of chaos, and it was set to order by the gods, just like in the Christian creation. Ishtar, or Inanna, had a sacred tree of life, and it was guarded by a serpent. She had a sacred tree of life. Utnapishtim and his wife, who have become gods in paradise, are like Adam and Eve in Eden. Eden, in fact, is a Sumerian word, who are cast out because they want to become as God, the Sumerians said. And that sounds familiar, too, to Christians. Enkidu, who was in the story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest story we have. It's a really interesting insight into Sumer, that they had this famous story about their hero Gilgamesh. But his friend is created by the Father God from clay, like Adam was. And the goddess Ishtar's language of love, when she tries to woo Gilgamesh next to be her lover, sounds a lot like the Song of Solomon. The Council of the Gods in Sumerian religion reminds us of biblical passages where God takes counsel with the triune and angels, and heaven is envisioned as a royal court. The Sumerians had a story of an ancient pious patriarch who saved his family in a great flood. The ziggurat was meant to scale to the heavens to reach the gods. And Abram's descendants built a ziggurat called the Tower of Babel, and that was a ziggurat that they used to try and reach the heavens. Animal sacrifices atoned for whatever angered the gods in the Sumerian religion, and for the Jews, animal sacrifice atoned for their sins. The Sumerian realm of the dead was like the Greek Hades or the Jewish Sheol. It was hell. The worldly wise advice of Utnapishtim is in the same vein as the Proverbs. And what could sound more Sumerian than the cynical, world-weary tone of Ecclesiastes? How many of you have read Ecclesiastes? Ecclesiastes is depressing. There's just no way around it. Everything he says is, I tried this, it didn't make me happy, that nothing worked. He's like, life is just, it's almost like he's saying life is just meaningless. It's a very depressing book, and it sounds so Sumerian in its approach. So, from this culture, the Semite Terah, whoever he was, Abraham's father is all we know, lived and raised his family, and the Bible says it was the land of his kindred. It refers to Terah's land as the land of his kindred, so apparently all his relatives were there, and he absorbed the sophisticated ways of this superior urban culture. Terah, as I said, moved to Haran. We don't know why, but after he died, Abram was ordered, go forth. In the Bible says Abram went. Two of the most powerful words in English literature. Abram went. Out of Mesopotamia, a wealthy caravan, packed up and moving and not knowing their goal, traveling by no known compass and taking his Sumerian outlook with him, and all their gain that they had gained, the Bible said, they took with them. Now the ancients would have laughed at this because even 500 years later, the ancients were saying, don't travel, don't change place, don't try to change your situation. In Africa, they pointed to the heavens and said, no man can escape his fate. Egyptians wrote, copy the forefathers, stay where you are. The Greeks might have told him the story of Prometheus, where Prometheus wanted to leave his station, and he flew up and he got too close to the sun, and his wings made of wax melted. India, in their philosophy, said time is black, irrational, merciless, and set no task in time. And China's I Ching, no purpose in journeys or earthly striving. So this was totally against ancient philosophy, even 500 years later. And Abraham is moving, and people do not understand it. This ancient advice, we'll hear about it when you study Lao Tzu. He's a Chinese philosopher that started the Tao, and Siddhartha Gautama, who started Buddhism, and they all said, do not journey, sit, contemplate, and meditate. And Heracles, too, who was in Ephesus, said the same thing. So here comes Abram. Now, here comes this man. You saw pictures of him in Sunday school, right? He has a long white beard almost to the ground and his cane, and he's leading all his people. Abram was strong, sly, and wealthy. Abram was not a wimpy little old man. And if you read the Bible account of what happened with Abram, you will have to agree. Sumerians in their sculptures show strong men, and because they labored and they valued a healthy body, we can only assume that Abram fit that mold. When he reached Canaan, he did his first sacrificial altar because he actually reached Canaan, and when he got there, that's when God said, I give this land to your seed. Now the boundaries of this land are kind of fuzzy in the Bible, but the promise is very clear. Then famine struck Canaan, and resourceful Abram headed for Egypt. And you remember what he did there. He said that Sarah was his sister. He gets into Egypt and he tells the Pharaoh, Sarah's my sister. Because he was afraid, since Sarah was so beautiful, that Pharaoh would kill him and take Sarah to be his wife. Well, since he said, Sarah's my sister, Pharaoh took her for his wife anyway. Why shouldn't he take his sister? Now, it wasn't a complete lie, because Sarah was half related. She was a half-sister of Abram. But he just said that, and then Pharaoh took Sarah. Now Abram doesn't know what to do, or Abram. And God sends a plague to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh finds out from his advisors what's happened. And Pharaoh interviews Abram because he's upset about this plague. And he says, Mazat? Mazat's a great Jewish word. It means, what the heck? You know, Mazat, she's your wife? Why didn't you tell me? And he was so frightened by this plague that he gave Sarah back and told Abram, just keep all the money and goods that I gave you for her. He had given lots of gold and flocks and everything. So now Abram goes on further, and he's richer than ever. Now, here's an example of his strength. When his Lot nephew settled in Sodom, which is the southern basin of the Dead Sea, Sodom became very wicked, and Lot wanted to try and save it, but he couldn't. And the Sumerian kings, before this happened, they had gone and captured Lot. They didn't like him. And so all the Canaanite and Sumerian kings captured Lot. And we read in the Bible, when Abram heard, he drew out his retainers, his house-born slaves, 18 and 300, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Mazat, Abram has 318 retainers to spare to go save Lot, and he can organize an army journey to go 100 miles just like that, and he headed them. He wasn't a crotchety old man. He was a powerful chieftain with wealth and men at his disposal. Abram was confident in his discussions with God. I like how he says to God, well, what are you going to give me, because I'm going to give my inheritance to my servant, he says in the Bible, because you haven't given me any heir. And he's 75 years old when he has this conversation with God, and he says, hey God, I'm 75, I don't have a kid yet, I'll just give everything I have to my servant. God says, oh no, you won't, because you are going to have an heir. So Abram accepts that, but you remember, Sarah's the same age as him, and it's sounding a little far-fetched. Then when he's 86 years old, and he's just about given up, Sarah gives up also, but Ishmael is born. So when he's 86, Sarah and him give up, and they say, well, maybe I was supposed to have my heir with someone else. So Sarah gives her handmaid to Abram at this time. He gets her pregnant, and Ishmael is born. Do you know who Ishmael is?
Yeah.
Okay, what peoples did he start? He's the head of
Ishmaelites? It was something like
He's
it.
the Arabs. He's the beginning of the Arab nation, whereas Sarah's son is the beginning of the Jewish nation. So there was Ishmael, and he was a victim, and they're 86 when Ishmael is born, and 13 years later, God repeats his promise, and Abram is 99 years old, and God says, not this time, the first time he said, I'm going to make you father of a great nation, but now he says, I'm going to make you father of many nations. And now Abram's 99 years old, and Sarah too, and he's still telling them they're going to have a baby. Well, Sarah thinks this is just hilarious, right? She doesn't believe it. But at this point, Sarah gets pregnant, and God changes Abram's name. He changed it to Abraham. Abram, father of a nation, but Abraham, father of many nations. So when God changed a person's name and gave him a new name, it was usually to establish a new identity. God changed Abram, which means high father, to Abraham, which means father of a multitude.
Just like Jacob's name got changed to Israel because he fathered tribes of Israel.
Right. And his wife's name was changed from Sarai to, which meant my princess, to Sarah, which meant mother of nations. So God changed their names when they were in their 90s. Before that, it was Abram. And if you read the Bible, he's Abram, and at this point he becomes Abraham, Father Abraham. So Abraham was an excellent businessman. He was an excellent leader and fighter. He was a shrewd dealer. He talked openly with God. He had confidence. And this isn't exactly the picture that they give children in Sunday school of Abraham. Abraham was a Sumerian. And God worked on him to change his way of thinking. And it wasn't overnight. But God did many things. If you read the story again of God's encounter with Abram, I want you to watch how God is slowly changing him from this Sumerian mentality of this is all there is, it's all about, getting riches, and how he works on him to help him to have a view that there is a God, an all-powerful God, that you can communicate with. And everyone thought he was crazy, of course. So in your thing that I handed out to you, there's some fun little things you can look at about ancient Sumer. You have some, here's useful tokens. This is a clay sphere that was used kind of like money. And it has some of their art, and I think there's a game in here that they used to play, is shown in here. Here's the remains of one of their ziggurats, and you can see how it has stairs going around the sides. This is the greatest one, was where Abraham was from, that was the head of the moon cult. And, okay, here on the last page, it has games, music, and sports. And that's kind of cute. I mean, people find a way to entertain themselves in every culture. And it would be fun if you were, have any of you ever even thought about it would be fun to be an archaeologist? Have you ever had that fantasy? Okay, I've got one person here. Can you imagine how exciting it was to discover these things? You're digging them up very carefully, and you're learning something about people that lived 5,000 years ago. It's pretty exciting. Okay, so that is it. That's our lecture on ancient Sumer.